Welcome back. Tonight, we are going somewhere warm and strange, and just a little unsteady under the sandals. Ancient Egypt has a way of feeling familiar because of the pyramids and gold masks and all those schoolbook pictures of people standing sideways. But we are not going to stand sideways. We are going to step right in, fronty-facing, into a place where words like celibacy mean something completely different than you might expect. You might have been told it was about abstinence, about the avoidance of intimacy, but in this long, slow river of a night, you will see how those words bend and curl like the Nile itself, and how the people who wore the title of celibate might have been anything but lonely. If you are new here, welcome. If you have been here before, welcome back. I make these long, meandering journeys through history, not to shock you, not to lecture you, but to keep you company in the small hours. So, if you do find yourself enjoying this river ride of a story, you might consider subscribing, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like leaving a friendly mark, let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. I like imagining the scatter of lamps and screens across the map, someone in the cool blue morning in Oslo, another listening under a ceiling fan in Manila, someone else in Texas drifting off after midnight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is heavy with heat, as if the desert sun has curled itself into the stone walls and refuses to leave. Even at night, the coolness is more of an idea than a reality. You are in a place that smells faintly of palm wine, incense, and bodies that have worked all day. The temple is not quiet. There is the soft padding of bare feet on worn limestone, the slow shuffle of linen robes, the dry rustle of papyrus being unrolled somewhere behind you. In the distance you hear a murmur of voices, low and steady, like bees in a far-off hive. This is not a monastery in the way you might picture from later centuries. There are no rows of monks in identical brown habits, no strict silence enforced by fear of some celestial punishment. Here, in the low lamplight of an Egyptian temple complex, celibacy is a different kind of vow altogether. You can feel the grit under your toes where the stone floor has been smoothed by centuries but still remembers the desert it came from. The sandals of the priests whisper over it, linen skirts brushing against calves. They pass by without much notice of you, not because you are invisible, but because everyone here has learned to see only what is meant to be seen. The word for celibacy, in their language, does not carry the weight of denying oneself forever. It is more like stepping out of one current to walk in another. To serve the gods, yes, but also to align your body with the cycles they believe hold the world together. The priest who glances at you now is older, his eyes dark and steady under the black line of coal that has smudged just slightly in the heat. His head is shaved, not for cleanliness in the way you think of it, but for ritual so that no stray hair could ever brush against the sacred implements during worship. His skin has that sunny-worn tone that comes from a lifetime under skies with no clouds, and he carries himself as if his body belongs to the temple more than to himself. This is what they mean by celibacy here. The body is not abandoned, but redirected. It is no longer for personal pleasure, not because pleasure is evil, but because pleasure belongs to the gods now. You walk with him through a colonnade where the stone columns rise like frozen lotus stalks, their capitals blooming in stillness overhead. The air is thick with the resin-sweet smell of frankincense burning in a small bronze bowl. Somewhere nearby, someone is chanting not a hymn you recognize, but a rhythmic calling that seems to braid with the flicker of torchlight on the wall. You realize, as you pass into the shadow of an archway, that celibacy here is not about turning away from life, but about standing at a particular doorway to it, a doorway that others pass by without notice, while those who serve here step through with their bodies, their voices, their breath. There is a small courtyard where moonlight spills like milk over the paving stones. In the center is a low pool of water, still and black, reflecting a slice of the night sky. You pause there, feeling the coolness drift upward. A young woman, another temple servant, kneels at the pool's edge, dipping a clay jug into the water. She is also called celibate, though she will tell you, with a quiet smile, that the word means something different for her. She is bound not by the absence of touch, but by the promise of purity in service. Purity here does not mean untouched, but touched only in ways that serve the sacred work. She has been chosen for her role not to be hidden away, but to stand in the place between the divine and the ordinary, where her body becomes part of the ritual itself. You begin to understand that in ancient Egypt, celibacy is not a wall, but a channel. Water does not stop flowing because it is redirected, it simply follows a different path. And for those who walk that path, the river leads inward as much as outward. You notice how the servants move with a rhythm that matches the slow breathing of the temple itself. Inhale with the gods, exhale into the offering bowls. In this place, the body is not denied. It is trained, tuned, used like a carefully kept instrument. The night deepens, and somewhere in the temple, a drum begins to beat, slow and deliberate. You feel it in your chest, not as music, but as a heartbeat you have stumbled into. Celibacy here is not an end, it is a tempo. It is a way of syncing your own pulse with that of stone, water, incense, chant, and moonlight. And as you stand in the warm shadows, listening, you realize that perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about celibacy in this land is thinking it is about absence at all. Here, it is presence of a particular kind. And you are just beginning to see what that means. You follow the sound of the drum without thinking, letting it guide your bare steps across the smooth, worn stone. It is not loud nor urgent, but steady, like someone knocking softly on a door they already know will open. The air thickens as you move deeper, the faint tang of coppery incense clinging to the roof of your mouth. Somewhere behind you, the faint ripple of the courtyard pool is already fading from memory, replaced by the sensation of the temple pressing closer around you. The columns rise higher here, their carved surfaces catching slivers of firelight in a way that makes the lotus petals at their tops seem alive. You pass between them, brushing fingers lightly along the grooves of the carvings. The stone feels cool at first, then warmer as your skin lingers, as if holding the memory of hands that have touched it for centuries. Your eyes adjust slowly to the dimmer light. What you first thought was empty, shadow resolves into a series of alcoves. Each is draped with linen dyed in faded colors, once bright blues and ochres, now softened into the tones of river mud and papyrus leaves. The smell here shifts, resin from acacia wood, a hint of beeswax, something faintly medicinal you cannot quite name. You are aware of other figures moving quietly in the same space, but their presence is more like that of shifting air currents than solid bodies. They do not look at you, and yet you have the sense that they notice you, not with suspicion, but with the acceptance of someone who has seen 100 pass through this place and expects you to join the rhythm without needing instruction. The drumbeat draws you onward until you reach a broader hall where the light is warmer. Here, oil lamps hang from bronze hooks on the walls, their flames swaying slightly in the draft of your movement. The floor is patterned in squares of darker stone, worn uneven where countless feet have crossed the same path. At the far end stands a low table carved from a single block of wood, its surface inlaid with ivory that catches the lamplight like slivers of moon. Behind it, an older man stands barefoot, his head bowed slightly as he runs a palm over a scroll unrolled before him. His linen kilt is tied in a precise knot, and the ends fall in an exact line against his thigh, an unthinking neatness born from repetition rather than vanity. When he looks up, you are caught by the clarity of his gaze. It is not penetrating in the way of someone trying to read your thoughts, but still, it fixes you in place. He gestures for you to come closer, the movement small but deliberate, like the shift of a bird folding its wings. As you approach, the drum beat seems to fade, not stop, just slip behind the edges of hearing. "You wish to know what we mean by celibacy," he says in a voice that feels less like sound and more like something you step into. It is low, careful, each word placed as if he is laying bricks in the air. People from far away think it is about the shutting away of the flesh. They do not understand. The body is not the enemy of the gods. It is the chisel, the paintbrush, the vessel. He turns the scroll toward you. You lean in and see a series of neat black signs painted on the pale surface, each one edged with a faint halo of faded ink. You cannot read the words, but you can feel the shape of them, a steady flow from right to left, like the Nile itself in miniature. He traces one sign with a fingertip. "This is the word," he says, "for what you call celibacy. But here it is closer to set apart. Not emptied, not refused, simply set apart." He rolls the scroll with a deftness that speaks of years of practice, the papyrus curling in on itself as if eager to be hidden again. It means we belong to a current that does not flow toward the same sea as yours. You may drink from the Nile like any man, but if you choose to serve here, you drink only from the channels that pass through the temple. You feed the gods, and through them, the world. That is all. There is no emphasis in his words, no moral weight pressing down. He could be explaining how to prune a palm tree, or how to bind a scroll, and yet the stillness that follows makes you aware of your own heartbeat again, slow and steady in the warm air. You thank him, though the sound of your own voice feels too loud here. He only inclines his head slightly, already returning to the scroll. You step back, letting the soft light swallow him once more. The hall opens into another courtyard, this one smaller than the last. The air here is fresher, stirred by the faintest desert breeze. The sky above is a deep indigo, its stars scattered and steady, untroubled by clouds. In the center of the courtyard, a young man kneels beside a low stone basin, carefully rinsing a set of shallow bronze bowls. The water glints in the lamplight as it runs over his fingers, and you notice the way his movements have no waste in them. Each bowl is lifted, rinsed, set down with the same quiet precision. He glances up as you approach, offering a faint smile that does not break his rhythm. "These will hold the bread," he says softly, as if continuing a conversation already in progress. You nod, though you are not certain if he expects a reply. His hands work as he speaks. "We do not eat until the offerings have been made. The gods eat first, then those who serve them may share in what remains. It is not a deprivation, it is a reminder. The gods are the mouth of the world. We are only the hands that place food there." You watch the way his fingers spread the bowls in a neat crescent, the bronze catching the stars above. You imagine them filled with small loaves, their crusts still warm from the oven, the smell of grain and wood smoke drifting upward into the night. The young man dips his hands into the basin one last time, letting the water run away across the stone before rising smoothly to his feet. "It is the same with touch," he says. "The gods touch first. We are touched only when they have no further need of it, and often they do not." His words settle around you like dust, fine and weightless, and you feel no urge to brush them away. Somewhere beyond the courtyard, the drum resumes its slow call. You follow it again, finding yourself in a narrow passage where the walls are painted with scenes of figures carrying offerings, their faces calm, their hands extended. The paint is faded, but you can still see the pale gold of grain, the deep green of lotus leaves. In some panels, the figures hold hands not as lovers, but as participants in the same act of giving. You think of the young man's words, "The gods first." The passage turns, and you step into a smaller chamber, lit only by a single oil lamp on a low stand. Here, the air is heavier with incense, and the shadows seem thicker than the space should allow. A woman sits cross-legged on a woven mat, her back straight, her gaze fixed on something just beyond you. Her hair is bound in tight braids against her skull, and a length of pale linen wraps her body loosely, leaving one shoulder bare. Her hands rest lightly on her knees, palms upward. She does not speak, and yet her stillness feels like a kind of communication, a quiet insistence that you slow your own breathing to match hers. When she does speak, her voice is low, almost flat, but it carries. "The body is the place of the gods," she says, "but the gods are not always here. When they are absent, we are like vessels waiting to be filled. It is not that we forbid ourselves what others seek, it is only that we cannot waste the space." She closes her eyes again, and you take the hint, stepping back into the corridor without a word. The temple seems larger now. The space is unfolding like petals in slow motion. You wander without urgency, letting the rhythm of bare feet on stone and the muffled drum carry you deeper. At one point you pass a row of narrow sleeping cells, each holding only a reed mat, a small wooden chest, and a folded blanket. The air smells faintly of sunny-dried linen. These are not the rooms of ascetics punishing themselves with discomfort. They are simply places to sleep, nothing more, nothing less. You pause at one open doorway, watching a figure, perhaps the young woman from the pool, kneel to unroll her mat. She smooths it with both hands, then sets a small clay cup beside it. The movements are unhurried, precise, but without the stiffness of performance. She glances up at you briefly, then looks away, already slipping into the quiet of the room. You keep walking, the spaces around you folding and unfolding, each one carrying its own small truth about what it means to be set apart. Here, it is not the emptiness of denial, but the fullness of a vessel kept ready for a purpose. And as you step once more into the open air of a courtyard, the night pressing softly against your skin, you begin to feel that readiness in yourself, not as a vow but as an awareness. You find your way back toward the sound of the drum, now joined by the low hum of voices. Somewhere nearby, bread is being placed into the bronze bowls, the smell of it wrapping around you in warm spirals. The gods will eat first. You will wait. And in the waiting, you understand a little more about why celibacy here was never meant to be about absence at all. The stars above are unchanged, steady as they were when you first stepped into the temple. You think of the older priest, the scroll in his hands, the word he traced with his fingertip, set apart. The Nile will keep flowing, the bread will keep baking, the gods will keep eating, and those who serve will keep waiting, not with emptiness, but with a kind of quiet fullness that belongs entirely to this place. You take a slow breath and let it go, the warm air carrying it upward into the night. In that moment, you feel as if you too have been set apart, not taken from the world, but placed somewhere within it that few will ever see. And perhaps, for now, that is enough. The bread comes to you not on a plate, but in a pair of hands. The young man from the courtyard places it there with no ceremony at all. It is warm, the crust slightly rough against your palms, the scent of grain and wood-fired ovens rising into the soft night air. You can feel the heat seeping into your fingers, almost as if it is trying to remind you that food is alive for a moment before it is eaten. You sit cross-legged on the smooth stone near the edge of the courtyard, and for a while no one speaks. Around you, others are eating in the same unhurried way, small bites, chewed slowly, as if conversation would dilute the taste. Even the sound of chewing feels softened here, wrapped in the blanket of the warm darkness. Somewhere a small bronze bell rings once, not to call or command anyone, but perhaps just to mark the shift from the work of the day to the quiet of the evening. You tear another piece from the loaf and let it rest on your tongue before you bite down. It is simple bread, no spices, no sweetness, but the way it sits in your mouth makes it feel heavier than its size. You remember the young man's words, "The gods eat first." The taste now is not just of grain, but of sequence of being part of an order that has been repeated every day for generations. The gods first, the the servants after. When the bread is gone, you notice the older priest again, moving slowly between small knots of people. He speaks briefly to each, a word or two, a hand on a shoulder. When he reaches you, he kneels so his eyes are level with yours. "You see now," he says, not as a question, but as an observation. You nod, though you are not certain which part he means. He smiles faintly, as though you've answered well enough. Then he rises and moves on, leaving behind a small ripple in the stillness that soon closes over. You stand, stretching your legs, and wander toward the far side of the courtyard where the columns open into a dim passage. The air here is cooler, stirred by a thin breath of wind that carries the faint scent of wet earth. Somewhere beyond the temple walls, the Nile is breathing in its own slow rhythm. The passage slopes downward slightly, and you can feel the change in the air with each step. The coolness deepens, the light thins, until you reach a chamber where water laps softly against a stone edge. It is an indoor pool, the surface so still it almost erases the fact that it is water at all. A pair of oil lamps float on small wooden rafts, their flames mirrored in trembling lines beneath them. A woman stands ankle-deep in the pool, her linen skirt tied high on her hips, her hands cupped around something you cannot see. She lowers them into the water, releases whatever they held, and steps back toward the edge. When she notices you, she smiles a slow, patient smile, as if you've arrived exactly when you were meant to. "This water," she says, "is the body of the temple. It must be kept pure. No one drinks from it. No one bathes in it. It is only for the gods." You glance at the water again, wondering what purity means in this place where the word celibacy is also not what you thought. She seems to follow your thoughts. "Purity is not the same as untouched," she says. "It is the same as the bread, or the touch, or the breath. The gods first, then, perhaps, the rest of the world." She steps out of the pool and wraps her skirt back down, the wet hem clinging to her shins. Her bare feet leave dark prints on the stone as she walks past you, vanishing into the shadows. You kneel at the pool's edge, dipping your fingers in. The water is cool, but not sharply, so more like the soft coolness of a shadow that has been shaded all day. It slides across your skin with a kind of weightlessness, as if reluctant to be disturbed. You pull your hand back and watch the ripples erase themselves. For a moment you imagine the gods watching, not with judgment, but with the patient curiosity of someone who knows you will never fully understand what they see. When you return to the courtyard, the bread is gone, and most of the people have drifted away to their sleeping mats or quiet tasks. The moon is high now, silvering the tops of the columns and the lintels. You feel a shift in the air, subtle but certain, like a held breath about to be released. Somewhere deeper in the temple, a low horn sounds, its note long and almost mournful. You follow it, passing through the outer halls into a smaller chamber lit by wall-mounted lamps. Here, 3 figures stand in a loose triangle around a central altar. The altar itself is low and rectangular, carved from stone that gleams faintly in the lamplight. Upon it lies a small heap of lotus blossoms, their pale petals curling inward now that night has claimed them. One of the figures, a man whose shaved head catches the light like polished ivory, takes a blossom, dips it in a bowl of scented oil, and lays it gently back on the stone. The scent rises, sweet and almost dizzying. They do not acknowledge you, but you stand quietly at the edge of the room, watching the slow repetition of the act. Lift, dip, lay down. Each movement is as deliberate as a heartbeat. You think again of the word the priest traced on the scroll, set apart. The flowers are not grown for beauty alone, nor the oil for perfume. They exist to be given in this way, and perhaps in this way alone. After a time, the 3 step back, bow their heads, and leave by a side passage. You approach the altar, drawn less by curiosity than by the quiet gravity of the space. The oil-dipped blossoms gleam faintly in the lamplight, their scent filling the air until it feels almost heavy. You rest your fingertips lightly against the stone surface. It is warm, though you cannot tell if from the heat of the oil lamps or from something else entirely. You leave without disturbing anything, the air behind you closing like a curtain. Back in the outer hall, a young acolyte passes you carrying a bundle of reeds bound with cord. He does not look up, his gaze fixed on some point ahead that you cannot see. You follow at a distance as he winds through the corridors, finally stepping into a wide room where a handful of others are already at work weaving the reeds into mats. The air smells fresh here, the sharp green scent of cut plants mixing with the dust of the stone floor. The work is silent but companionable. Each person bends over their task, hands moving with a rhythm that belongs as much to muscle memory as to thought. You watch for a while, noticing how the strands cross and tighten, how the weave grows almost invisibly under their fingers. One woman pauses to trim a frayed edge with a small bronze knife, the cut clean and satisfying. An older man looks up and gestures for you to sit. He pushes a small bundle of reeds toward you, along with a length of cord. "It is simple," he says. "Over, under, pull tight, then again and again, like breathing." You try it, your fingers awkward at first, but soon finding the basic rhythm. Over, under, pull tight. The motion becomes hypnotic. The feel of the reeds rough and smooth at once, their faint dampness cooling your fingertips. You begin to understand why the work is done in silence. It is not the kind of task that needs words. The weaving is its own language, spoken by the hands. After a time, your small section of matting begins to take shape. The older man nods, satisfied, and returns to his own work. You keep going not because you must, but because the rhythm feels good in your hands. Over, under, pull tight. The world narrows to the feel of the reeds, the sound of the fibers brushing together, the slow deepening of the weave. When the bundle is gone, you set the matting aside. A faint ache in your fingers tells you you've been at it longer than you realized. You stand, stretching, and the older man gives you a quiet smile, one that feels like permission to leave. Outside, the night has deepened further, the temple sinking into its own kind of sleep. You walk through the colonnade where the moonlight pools in pale rectangles on the floor. The air smells faintly of the oil-soaked lotus blossoms and of the bread that was eaten hours ago but still lingers in memory. Somewhere far off, the Nile moves with its slow, unstoppable breath. You realize, standing there, that celibacy in this place is woven much like the mats in the workroom. Each strand bread, water, touch, offering, silence is nothing on its own, but over, under, pull tight, and a pattern begins to form. Not one of denial, but of deliberate arrangement. The gods first. The pattern is for them. The strength of the weave comes from its order, and as you breathe in the night, the reed-scented air cool against your skin, you begin to feel that pattern settling into you. It is not yours yet, but you can sense how someone could live inside it, day after day, until it became the way they breathed without thinking. You stay there a while longer, letting the stillness press gently against you until the pull of sleep finally finds you. Somewhere in the temple, a door closes softly. Somewhere else, water drips in a slow, steady rhythm, and you, set apart for just this moment, step quietly into the long, deep night. The place you have been given to sleep is not really a room, not in the way you would name it in your own world. It is a narrow cell with walls of cool stone and a ceiling so low you can touch it if you raise your hand. The door is a curtain of undyed linen, pulled aside just enough to let the soft spill of lamplight from the corridor find its way in. On the floor is a reed mat that still carries the faint green scent of the workroom where it was made. The mat is neither soft nor hard, it simply accepts your weight without fuss. Beside it, a folded blanket of loosely woven linen waits, smelling faintly of sun and river water. A small clay cup sits near the head of the mat, half filled with water that has been resting long enough for the dust to settle to the bottom. You lie down, the reed mat pressing small patterns into your skin, From somewhere outside your cell, you hear the deep, slow voice of the Nile in the distance, water moving against the shore in its own time, unhurried, as it has always done. Closer, the temple breathes with smaller sounds, the faint scuff of bare feet on stone, the occasional whisper of linen brushing against a wall, the muted splash of water poured into a basin. These noises are not interruptions, but part of the night's quietness. You close your eyes, and the darkness behind your eyelids feels different from the darkness of the room, closer, denser. You drift somewhere between waking and sleep, unsure which will claim you. But before the tide of rest fully takes you, a voice not loud but near calls softly from the corridor. Your name is not spoken, but you know it is you they mean. You rise, wrapping the blanket loosely around your shoulders, and step out into the cooler air of the hall. A young acolyte is waiting there, holding a small clay lamp. The flame wavers slightly as he inclines his head, then turns to lead you along a corridor you do not remember walking before. The walls here are undecorated, smooth and bare, the stone cool under your fingertips. The passage opens into a small courtyard with no roof, only the vast black dome of the night sky above. A half-moon hangs there, surrounded by stars that seem sharper in this enclosed space. The air is scented with the faint sweetness of night-blooming flowers somewhere beyond the temple walls. In the center of the courtyard stands a low, square platform of stone. Upon it rests a shallow bronze basin, its surface glimmering faintly in the moonlight. An older priest stands beside it, his head bare, his linen robe unbelted so it hangs in soft folds. His eyes meet yours, and he gestures for you to come closer. "This is the water of the moon," he says quietly. His voice seems to fall without echo in the still air. "It is drawn only when the moon is strong enough to see its own reflection. It is used for the washing of the senses, so that the gods may pass through without distortion." He dips his hands into the basin, then touches his fingertips lightly to his closed eyelids, his ears, his lips. The gesture is slow, deliberate, as though each point he touches is a doorway. He nods to you, and you mimic his actions. The water is cool, but it carries a strange softness that lingers on your skin. You feel its dampness as more than wetness, something like the memory of a quiet place you have never been. The priest dips his hands again, this time touching his chest just over his heart, then the inside of each wrist. You follow, the water tracing small rivers along your skin before sinking into warmth. When it is done, he steps back, letting the moonlight fall across both of you. For a long moment, there is nothing but the quiet presence of the moon, the water, and the warm air between you. Then, without a word, he turns and walks away, disappearing into a side passage. The young acolyte who brought you here remains at the edge of the courtyard, waiting. You follow him back through the cool corridors, the scent of the moon water still clinging faintly to your skin. When you return to your sleeping place, the reed mat feels somehow different, as if it has been waiting for you to be ready to rest on it. You lie down again, the faint wetness on your skin cooling in the night air. Your breath lengthens without effort, and this time, sleep comes quietly. When you wake, the first light of dawn is just beginning to reach the upper edges of the courtyard walls. The air has shifted, the heaviness of the night replaced by the faint, dry freshness that comes before the sun climbs high. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the call of a bird, its voice clear and thin, like a thread pulling the day into being. You rise and step into the courtyard, where the sky is the pale color of unpolished alabaster. A few others are already moving about, their steps quiet but purposeful. One carries a basket of folded linens toward the washing place. Another balances a small clay jar on her shoulder, its narrow mouth sealed with a wad of cloth. The older priest from the night before is there, standing near the pool where you first saw the young woman drawing water. He is speaking softly to a pair of younger men, gesturing toward the pool and then toward the shadowed archways leading deeper into the temple. His words are too quiet to catch, but the young men nod, then move off quickly in the direction he indicated. You find yourself walking toward the pool without quite deciding to. The water this morning is a brighter color than it was under the moon, still and dark, but carrying a faint green cast from the reflection of the courtyard plants. You kneel, dipping your fingers in. The coolness is sharper now, more awake, as if the water itself has been roused from sleep. The young woman from before appears, her steps light but steady. She is carrying another clay jug, larger than the one you saw her use the night before. She kneels across from you, lowering the jug into the pool with practiced ease. "The first drawing of the morning is always for the gods," she says, without looking up. "Even the river waits for this." You watch as she lifts the jug, the water inside shifting with a slow heaviness. She rests it on her knee for a moment before standing, then turns toward the archway that leads to the inner sanctum. Her movements are unhurried, but there is a weight to them, a kind of inevitability that makes you feel you should not follow. Instead, you wander toward the colonnade at the far side of the courtyard. The columns are warm-colored in the rising light, their carved lotus capitals holding small pockets of shadow. Between them, you can see glimpses of the desert beyond the temple walls, its pale sands already touched with gold where the sunlight finds them. The contrast is stark. Within the temple, the air still carries the cool, damp scent of water. Outside, the heat is already gathering its strength. You pass through a narrow side passage and find yourself in a long hall you have not seen before. Here, the walls are covered with painted scenes, processions of figures carrying offerings, musicians playing harps and flutes, dancers with their arms arched overhead. The colors, though faded, are still rich in places. Deep reds, soft blues, the black of coal outlining graceful eyes. You walk slowly, tracing the painted lines with your gaze. One panel catches your attention. It shows a figure kneeling before a tall, stylized image of a god. The figure's hands are empty, but their posture is one of offering. At their side stands another figure, one hand resting lightly on the kneeling person's shoulder. You look at the faces, the expressions are calm, almost detached, but the closeness of the two figures feels intimate in a way that has nothing to do with possession. You linger there, wondering how many have passed this wall without really seeing it. At the far end of the hall, a low doorway opens into a room where a group of acolytes are grinding grain. The smell is warm and earthy, filling the air with the promise of bread not yet baked. They work in silence, stone grinding against stone, their bodies moving in steady, practiced rhythm. The sound is hypnotic, the slow crush and scrape of grain becoming flour, flour becoming offering. One of them glances up at you, his face open and unguarded. He gestures toward a basket of grain and an empty mortar at the edge of the room. You take your place, pouring a small measure into the hollow and taking up the pestle. The weight of it feels good in your hands, the stone smooth from years of use. You fall into the rhythm, easily press, turn, lift, press again. The sound joins the others, blending into a quiet chorus of work. As you grind, you notice how the act itself carries the same pattern you've been seeing everywhere, a task done not for its own sake, but as a step in a larger order. The flour will become bread, the bread will be offered, the gods will eat first. Over, under, pull tight, the weave again. When the basket is empty, you set the pestle aside. Your arms are warm from the effort, your hands dusted with fine flour. One of the acolytes offers you a damp cloth, and you wipe your palms clean. No one speaks, but several offer you the brief nod that serves as acknowledgement here. You step back into the hall, the painted figures watching silently from the walls. The morning light is stronger now, pouring into the temple's open spaces, casting sharp-edged shadows along the stone floors. Somewhere, a bell chimes twice. It is a signal for something, though you do not know what. But your feet seem to know, carrying you toward the central courtyard where the air feels charged, as though the temple is inhaling before a prayer. And in that slow gathering of purpose, you feel yourself drawn more deeply into the pattern that has been unfolding since you arrived, one that no longer feels entirely separate from your own breath. The chime fades into the air like ripples on still water, and almost at once the temple shifts. Not hurriedly, never hurriedly, but with a quiet, collective turning towards some unseen center, people emerge from the corridors, drifting into the central courtyard, as if drawn by a thread you cannot see. No one calls instructions, yet every movement falls into place. Linen robes adjusting in the morning light, bare feet padding softly over warm stone, the glint of bronze vessels catching the sun. You find yourself moving with them, though you still don't know what the chime has called for. The air feels denser now, warmer with breath and presence. At the heart of the courtyard stands a raised platform, low enough to be approached easily, yet high enough that what rests upon it commands attention. Today, that is a small carved shrine, its wooden surface polished to a depth that makes the grain glow like quiet fire. It is narrow, just wide enough to hold what you now see, the morning offerings. A priest places them there one by one, loaves of bread, their crusts golden from the oven's heat, shallow bowls of honey that catch the sunlight like trapped amber, bunches of dates so dark they seem to drink the light instead of reflect it. Each movement is deliberate, the placement of every item as careful as the laying of bricks in a wall meant to last centuries. The smell is intoxicating grain, sweetness, the faint fermented tang of date wine. It drifts over the courtyard, and your body remembers it is morning, remembers the idea of hunger. But here, hunger is not meant to be answered right away. It is meant to wait. The gods first. A hush falls, not silence, but a settling. The older priest you have come to notice often steps forward. He does not raise his voice, but every head turns toward him. He begins to speak, the words flowing in the temple's tongue, a river of sound you cannot follow fully but can feel moving around you. The cadence is steady, each phrase rising and falling like the measured pull of a loom shuttle. You sense that these are not prayers in the way you have known them. They are reminders, recitations that set the world into order again each morning. The crowd leans slightly forward as he lifts his hands over the offerings. His fingers trace shapes in the air, circles, spirals, lines that end in gentle curves, movements that seem more about balance than spectacle. From the far side of the courtyard, a second voice joins his, a woman's, low and resonant, weaving between his phrases like the second thread of a braid. The two voices together form something that feels larger than the space can contain. Then it is done. The offerings remain, but the priests step back. No one rushes forward, no one takes anything. It will be a while yet before anyone eats. The bread is not simply food now, it is part of a contract older than memory. People begin to disperse. Some vanish into the shade of the colonnades, others head toward the temple's outer edges where work awaits. You drift with a small group toward a side passage that leads to a garden you have not seen before. It is not large, a square of open earth enclosed by high stone walls, but it holds more green than you expected inside a temple. Date palms rise at the corners, their fronds whispering against the brightening sky. Beds of herbs line the paths, mint, coriander, something sharp and resinous that you can't quite name. The air is alive with scent. A woman kneels near one of the beds, her hands buried in the soil. Her robe is hitched high around her waist, the hem dark with earth. She glances up at you with a brief, knowing smile. "This is for the gods too," she says, brushing soil from her fingers. When they breathe in, it is this they smell. You crouch nearby, watching as she presses small seeds into the soil with the flat of her finger. Each seed is given its own shallow hollow, a pinch of earth tucked over it like a blanket. Her movements are patient, almost tender. She does not seem to be planting for harvest. You suspect the plant's purpose is to be gathered while still green, crushed and burned for their scent. Even in that, the gods first. A pair of young boys enter the garden carrying baskets. They set to work gathering the lower palm fronds, cutting them cleanly near the base with small bronze blades. Their chatter is low, intermittent, not discouraged, but subdued, as though they are aware that the plants are part of something larger than themselves. You walk the narrow path between the beds. A low wall of mud brick runs along one side of the garden, topped with shards of broken pottery pressed into the surface to keep animals from climbing over. Beyond it, you can hear the faint murmur of voices from the street outside the temple walls. It is strange to be reminded that the city exists just beyond this enclosed world. Back inside, the air shifts again cooler as you pass through shaded corridors, warmer when you step into pockets of sunlight. You find yourself in a room lined with shelves of unbaked clay jars, each stoppered with cloth tied by reed cord. The smell here is dry, dusty, but under it is something sweet, the concentrated scent of dried fruit. A man is crouched at one of the lower shelves, rearranging the jars. He looks up briefly, nods, then goes back to his work without speaking. In one corner, a small table holds an assortment of tools, a narrow bronze scoop, a set of wooden paddles, a bowl of clean sand. The tools are worn smooth from handling, their purpose obvious in their simplicity. This is where things are measured, packed, stored for the gods and for those who serve them. Nothing here is for casual use. Everything has its place, and every place its meaning. Later, you return to the central courtyard. The shrine still stands at its center, but the offerings are gone. No crumbs, no sticky trace of honey. It is as though they have been absorbed entirely, leaving only the memory of their presence. You do not know if the gods have eaten, or if the bread was carried elsewhere to be shared. It almost doesn't matter. The point is not in the eating, but in the giving. The courtyard is quieter now. Only a few figures remain, moving without hurry. You find a place along the colonnade where a patch of shadow offers relief from the sun. The stone beneath you is warm, but not yet hot enough to drive you away. From here, you can see the top of the temple wall where it meets the sky. A hawk circles above, its wings motionless for long moments before it tilts and catches the light. Somewhere nearby, a low voice begins a chant, not the formal recitation you heard earlier, but something softer, more private. It could be a prayer, or simply a song to keep the hands moving in their work. The rhythm of life here is beginning to take root in you. It is not about deprivation, though there are absences. It is about sequence, pattern, the placing of one thing before another, and always the gods first. Your mind drifts back to the word the priest showed you on the scroll, set apart. You are beginning to understand that being set apart is not about isolation. It is about alignment, standing where the current is strongest, so it moves through you instead of around you. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the scents and sounds settle into your senses. The faint tang of date wine lingering in the air, the quiet scuff of feet on stone, the whisper of palm fronds against the high walls. Somewhere, a jar lid is lifted, the hollow thud echoing briefly before being muffled again. The temple breathes in, and you breathe with it. And in that slow rhythm, the day moves forward. Tasks will be done, offerings given, water carried, mats woven. And through it all, your body remains part of the work. Not denied, not ignored, but placed in service of something that was here before you and will be here long after. The gods first, and in that, a strange kind of freedom. The sun is higher now, climbing into a sky that seems almost too large for the walled courtyard. The shadows have shortened and softened, clinging close to the bases of the columns. The air is no longer the gentle breath of morning. It carries a weight now, a promise that the day will press down with its full hand before long. The temple adjusts to this without fuss. In the outer corridors, woven mats are hung at the open archways to sift the light, turning the gold of the sun into something softer, greener. The smell of the garden herbs drifts in through these filters, sharpened slightly by the heat. The sound changes to less, the quiet murmur of dawn preparations, more the measured footsteps of people already in the rhythm of their daily roles. You step out from your shaded place along the colonnade, drawn by a ripple of movement in the far side of the courtyard. A group of younger acolytes are gathering there, some carrying bundles wrapped in linen, others balancing trays covered with reed lids. They speak in low voices, occasionally glancing toward a narrow passage that leads deeper into the temple's inner spaces. When the older priest arrives, they fall silent without being told. He carries nothing, but in the small stillness that follows his appearance, you realize he brings the thing that matters. The reason. One by one, the acolytes offer up their burdens for his inspection. He does not unwrap them, but rests his hand lightly upon each bundle, as if weighing it not in grams but in readiness. When he nods, the acolytes turn and begin to file toward the inner passage. You follow, staying near the rear. The corridor narrows quickly, the light thinning until it feels like you are moving into a deep shaft of shadow. The walls here are close enough that your fingertips can skim both sides at once, the cool stone grounding you in the dark. Somewhere ahead, you catch the faint flicker of torchlight. The passage opens into a chamber where the air is thick with resinous incense. It clings to your tongue, to the inside of your nostrils, until you feel as though you are breathing through a veil. Here, the bundles are unwrapped, a loaf of bread dense with honey and figs, a heap of dried fish that glints faintly with salt, a small jar of beer the colour of polished bronze. The trays hold dates so ripe they have split their skins, oozing a dark sweetness onto the reed matting. The priest moves among these things slowly, as though arranging the planets themselves. He places the bread beside the beer, the fish opposite the fruit, balancing the table as much by feel as by sight. His hands are sure but unhurried, each adjustment ending with a brief pause, a small moment for the change to settle into the air. You realize you are in the sanctuary where the offerings are readied for the shrine at the temple's heart. This is not a place for everyone. It holds itself apart even from the temple that holds it. The walls are painted with scenes of gods seated in high-backed chairs, their faces calm but their eyes fixed forward with a focus that feels endless. In some panels, human figures approach them with hands outstretched, carrying the same bread, beer, and fruit you see now. The paint is worn, but the shapes are clear enough to recognize. This has been done for longer than anyone here has been alive, and likely longer than the temple itself has stood. The priest lifts the bread again, holding it level with his chest. He murmurs something not to the acolytes, not to you, but to the gods pictured on the walls. The sound is like a stone dropped into deep water, brief but rippling outward into the silence. When he sets the bread back down, the air feels subtly different, as if the act has nudged the whole chamber a fraction closer to what it is meant to be. When all is arranged, two of the younger men step forward to carry the trays. Another lifts the jar of beer with both hands, its surface sweating slightly in the warm air. The priest takes nothing himself. Instead, he gestures for them to follow him into a side door that you had not noticed before. It is narrow, almost hidden in the painted wall, and you have to turn sideways to pass through. Beyond it, the air cools sharply. The light comes from narrow slits high in the wall, thin as knife cuts, letting in only the palest threads of the sun. The floor here is smoother, the kind of stone that has been polished more by reverence than by feet. The corridor slopes upwards slightly until it ends at a great set of double doors bound in bronze. The doors open inward with a groan that is more felt than heard. Inside, the sanctuary glows with the dim, steady light of oil lamps set in high niches. The air is cooler still, carrying a faint trace of lotus and cedarwood. At the far end stands the great shrine, not a towering monument, but a carved chest on a raised plinth, its wooden panels covered in gold leaf that softens rather than shines. The lid is closed. It will remain closed. The priest approaches it alone. The rest of you remain several steps back, forming a loose semicircle. He sets the offerings before the shrine, his movements almost too slow to follow. The bread first, then the beer, then the fish and fruit. He steps back, bows deeply, and murmurs again in the temple's tongue. The words fall into the space like seeds into tilled earth. For a moment, nothing moves. The room holds its breath. Then the priest straightens, turning toward the rest of you. He does not speak. He only meets the eyes of each person in turn, and in that gaze is the confirmation. The offering has been given. The gods have been served first. When you leave, the corridor feels warmer than before, as though stepping out of shadow into sun. The acolytes carry the now empty trays and jar with the same care they used bringing them in. Nothing is wasted, not the gestures, not the food, not the moments in between. Back in the outer halls, the temple resumes its quieter rhythm. People pass in twos and threes, linen robes brushing the air with a dry whisper. Some carry baskets of herbs from the garden. Others balance jars of water drawn from the pool. The work continues, as it has since before dawn, as it will until the sun slides back down the sky. You find your way toward the shaded garden again. The woman who planted seeds earlier is gone now, but the bed she worked in shows the neat rows of her labor. A thin sheen of moisture darkens the soil, perhaps from water poured as offering before planting. The smell of mint is sharper here in the heat. When you brush a leaf, its oil clings to your fingertips. You stand there a while, breathing in the scent, the hum of bees in the air. From beyond the wall, the muffled sounds of the city reach you, a cartwheel creaking, the call of a vendor. It feels impossibly far away, though you know it lies just beyond the stone. You are inside the pattern now, woven into the temple's sequence of tasks and offerings. And the pattern does not rush for the world outside. The sun shifts, and the heat deepens. In the covered walkways, people move more slowly now, conserving their energy. You begin to understand why the work here flows in such deliberate measures, not only for reverence, but for endurance. The body is a tool of the gods. It cannot be worn down carelessly. From somewhere behind you comes the steady tap of wood on stone. An elderly man approaches, leaning on a carved staff. His face is lined deeply, the kind of lines that come from squinting into sunlight year after year. He stops when he reaches you, resting both hands on the staff's head. "You have seen the offering," he says. It is not a question, but you nod anyway. He studies you for a moment, then glances toward the pool in the courtyard's center. "The gods eat first," he says, "and in that, they feed us. Not just with what remains, but with the order of it. Without the order, we eat dust." He starts walking again, and you match his pace. His steps are slow but steady, the staff making a soft click each time it meets the stone. "You think celibacy is about closing the door," he continues. "But here, it is about keeping the doorway clear. No clutter, no crowding. So when the gods pass through, they do not stumble." You glance at him, but his eyes are on the path ahead. "People outside think this is a loss," he says. "They think it means you go without. But you are not without. You are simply with the gods, and that is not nothing." The staff clicks again and again. You begin to hear it not as a crutch, but as a metronome, keeping the slow, steady rhythm of his walk and of the temple itself. When you reach the far colonnade, he stops, turns to you briefly, and nods. Then he slips away into the deeper shade, the sound of the staff fading with him. You stand for a moment, watching the place where he disappeared. The air smells faintly of cedar now, though you cannot see where it comes from. You realize the day is far from over, yet somehow it feels full, already full in a way that has nothing to do with what you have done, and everything to do with how it has been done, here. The gods first, always, and that order, repeated without fail, is beginning to settle into you as surely as the temple's warm stone under your bare feet. The courtyard tilts subtly toward afternoon, though the sun is still high and the heat still steady in its hold. The shadows along the base of the columns have thickened, no longer the delicate ribbons of morning but darker pools, stretching inward as if seeking the shelter themselves. The air is heavier now, moving slower, as if it too has been instructed to conserve itself. You find your pace changing without thinking about it. Earlier, you stepped lightly through the temple's spaces. Now, your body moves in longer, slower arcs, letting the heat roll past instead of pushing against it. It feels almost like drifting downriver without paddling, letting the current, not your own arms, determine the speed. Somewhere in the colonnade, a pair of acolytes sit cross-legged in the shade, their backs against the cool stone. Between them rests a tray of pale, round loaves. One of them is scoring the tops with a small bronze blade, the cuts shallow but precise, each loaf marked with a symbol that looks like a pair of bent reeds. You pause to watch. When the knife lifts, the dough relaxes a little, as though exhaling. The other acolyte glances up at you and smiles faintly. "These will go to the outer altar before sunset," he says. "It is for the people who cannot come inside. The gods see them too." You nod, though the weight of the words lingers longer than the moment. Inside, outside, both drawn into the same slow tide of giving. You move on, the smell of warm dough trailing behind you. Through a narrow archway, you step into a low room you haven't seen before. It is cooler here, the floor damp in patches where water has been spilled. Two young women are kneeling beside a wide, shallow basin carved into the floor, washing what looks like woven reed trays. The trays are flecked with crumbs and stained dark in places, but the women work patiently, dipping and scrubbing, until each one looks new again. They glance at you briefly, then back to their work. One tilts a clean tray to let the water run off in thin streams, droplets catching the dim light. When she sets it aside, she runs her hand gently over its surface, as if checking for hidden roughness. It is a small act, almost invisible, but it holds the same quiet care you've seen in everything here. Nothing leaves a hand until it is ready to serve again. You step back into the light and notice a ripple of movement near the outer wall of the courtyard. Several people are climbing a narrow stair built into the stone, carrying small baskets on their hips. You follow, the heat thickening as you ascend. At the top, the wind greets you not strong, but sharper than the air below. It smells faintly of dust and something far off and green, maybe the edge of the Nile's breath. The stair leads to a flat roof bordered by a low parapet. Up here, the city is visible beyond the temple walls' mud-brick rooftops, thin lines of smoke curling into the sky, a shimmer of sunlight bouncing off pottery set to dry. The sound of the city is muted, but it carries differently here. A donkey braying, a seller's call, the ring of a hammer against wood. Life outside moves faster, less bound to the measured rhythm inside. The baskets hold bundles of papyrus stems, some fresh and green, others dried to a pale gold. The group scatters to different corners of the roof where the stems are laid out in careful lines. The fresh ones are set to dry, the dried ones are gathered into tighter bundles, bound with thin cords. The scent is grassy and sweet in the heat, almost like fresh-cut hay. One of the workers straightens and stretches his back, catching you watching. "Paper for the records," he says simply. Then, after a beat, "and for the songs." You stay a while, letting the wind move across your face. From up here, the temple looks both separate from and part of the city, an island, but one tied to the shore by invisible lines. You think of the loaves marked for the outer altar, the paper for songs that will be carried beyond these walls, the way the temple breathes outward as much as inward. When you descend, the air feels heavier again, the walls closing around you like cool hands. Passing through a side hall, you hear the faint hum of voices. It draws you into a chamber lined with low benches. A group of priests and acolytes sit there, some holding small wax tablets, others nothing at all. At the front of the room, a man is speaking in a slow, even voice. Every so often, he pauses, and the group repeats his words in unison, their tones careful, almost melodic. You realize they are practicing the recitation of the temple's verses, the ones you have heard murmured over bread, over water, over the air itself. The rhythm is hypnotic. Phrase, pause, echo, phrase, pause, echo. Even without knowing the meaning, you can feel the weight in the words. They are not decoration, they are tools, as much as the reed mat or the bronze bowl. The man at the front gestures to a young acolyte, who stands and begins to recite alone. His voice trembles at first, then steadies as the others listen in silence. When he finishes, the man nods once, the kind of nod that carries both approval and the expectation of further practice. You slip out before the next recitation begins. In the hall, the air feels strangely still, as though holding the echo of those voices. By now, the sun has moved far enough to cast new shadows along the courtyard floor. They stretch at odd angles now, long fingers of darkness pointing toward the pools of shade. Near one column, the elderly man with the carved staff sits on a low stool. He is holding something in his lap, a small wooden box with a lid that slides back on tiny grooves. Inside are lengths of cord, each one knotted at intervals. You watch as he fingers the cords slowly, sliding them between thumb and forefinger as though counting. When he looks up and sees you, he holds one out. The knots are uneven, some close together, others far apart. "This is for keeping the days," he says. "Not all of them, only the ones that belong to the gods." His fingers tap one of the closer knots. "This one is today. The next is the day we open the high shrine. The next, the day we call the river to rise." He hands the cord to you for a moment. The fibers are coarse, but warm from his touch. It feels strange to hold time in your hands, to feel it not as numbers but as distance between knots. When you give it back, he slides it into the box and closes the lid with a soft click. The afternoon leans further on. The heat still lingers, but a subtle change has begun, the edge softening, the air loosening its grip. People move a little more freely now, as though the temple itself has exhaled. Some head toward the workrooms, others gather near the garden. A small group walks toward the outer gates, carrying reed baskets that swing gently with each step. You follow them as far as the courtyard wall. Through the open gate, you glimpse the street outside, busier now than when you first climbed to the roof. Children dart between market stalls, their shouts bright in the dusty air. Vendors call out prices for figs, for onions, for pottery stacked in neat columns. The smell of roasting meat drifts in on the wind. The group you followed disappears into the crowd, their baskets swaying. You realize they are delivering something from the temple, perhaps the loaves for the outer altar, perhaps herbs or medicine. Whatever it is, the gesture is the same, the temple extending a hand beyond its walls. When you turn back, the gate swings slowly shut, and the sound of the street fades like a tide pulling away. Inside again, the air feels calmer, more measured. The temple's pulse is slower now, as though preparing for the next beat of the day. You wander back to the shaded colonnade, the warm stone under your bare feet grounding you in the moment. Somewhere nearby, a single drumbeat sounds low, deliberate, and unhurried. It doesn't call for urgency, it calls for attention. You stand still, letting it settle into you, and you think again of what the old man said. Celibacy here is about keeping the doorway clear. No clutter, no crowding. So, when the gods pass through, they do not stumble. The drum sounds again, and you find yourself breathing with it. In, out, the gods first. The drumbeat lingers in your chest long after its last echo has faded into the stone. It isn't a summons in the way you first thought. It is a reminder, a slow, steady hand on the shoulder, turning you gently toward the next moment. From somewhere deeper in the temple, a low murmur of voices begins to rise. You drift toward it without hurry, letting the sound lead you through a side corridor where the air cools abruptly, like stepping into shade after walking all morning in the sun. The walls here are bare stone, worn smooth in places where countless hands have trailed along them. Your own hand follows the curve almost without thinking, and the coolness seeps into your palm. The passage ends in a high, narrow arch that opens into a chamber you have not seen before. Light spills in from above through a square opening, catching on the dust motes suspended in the air so they seem to hang there, turning slowly, like a constellation. Around the edges of the room, long, low benches have been pushed back against the walls. At the center, a shallow depression in the floor holds a thin layer of fine sand. A circle of figures stands there barefoot, their robes brushing the sand as they shift slightly from foot to foot. One of the older women is speaking in a calm, even voice, and the others respond in unison. It is not chanting exactly, more like a slow call and reply. The pace is deliberate, leaving space between each exchange for the sound to settle. You ease into the shadows near the doorway, listening. You do not understand the words, but you can feel the shape of them, phrases that rise gently, then fall back, like breath. The speaker gestures with one hand toward the floor, and the group lowers themselves into a kneeling position. Their movements are fluid, practiced, with no sound but the faint rustle of linen. They lean forward, pressing their foreheads lightly to the sand. For a moment, the room holds absolutely still, and you feel a hush settle into your own bones. Then the older woman begins again, her voice quieter now, and they rise together, resuming their circle. The pattern repeats. Standing, kneeling, standing again, the body moving as an echo of the voice. After a time, the circle breaks. Some remain to speak quietly with the woman. Others drift toward the benches, where small clay cups of water wait. The air carries a faint herbal scent, maybe mint or coriander, that rises as the cups are lifted. A young man offers you one with a nod. The water is cool, and the sip leaves a trace of sweetness on your tongue. He sees you glance toward the sand and smiles faintly. It remembers, he says. When you tilt your head, unsure, he gestures toward the shallow depression. Every forehead leaves a mark, even if the wind takes it later. The gods see them while they are still here. You look again, and yes, the surface is faintly dimpled with the impressions left by the kneeling. They will fade soon enough. But for now, the marks hold the record of the morning's devotion. You leave the chamber quietly, the cool water still lingering in your mouth. The corridors seem brighter now, the sound of the voices replaced by the softer noises of daily work. Somewhere nearby, a broom is sweeping against stone. The gentle scrape and swish comes in steady intervals, like a whispering metronome. Following the sound, you find yourself in a long, narrow hall where two women are sweeping the floor from opposite ends. They work toward each other in measured strokes, the brooms fashioned from bundled reeds bound tightly with cord. The dust they gather is fine and pale, catching the light like powdered gold before it falls into the small piles they nudge along. One of the women pauses to brush her hand across her forehead, leaving a faint streak of dust in its place. She notices you and laughs softly, shaking her head as if to say the dust is harmless, even welcome. "Better here than under the gods' feet," she says, nodding toward the far end of the hall. You glance that way and see an open doorway leading into another chamber. From here, it is little more than a wedge of shadow, but the air drifting from it is cooler still, carrying a faint sweetness. You step closer. Inside, the space is small but bright, its walls painted with delicate images of papyrus reeds and lotus blossoms. A low wooden table holds a series of shallow clay dishes, each containing a mound of something different. Powdered resin, dried flower petals, crushed herbs. The smell is layered and complex floral at first, then sharp, then warm. A man in a short linen kilt stands behind the table, his hands moving deftly between the dishes. He picks up a pinch from one, mixes it into another, then leans down to inhale the scent before adjusting the balance again. He glances up at you with a quick smile. "For the lamps," he says. "The gods like the air sweet when they enter." He presses a small amount of the mixture into your palm. It is crumbly, warm from his fingers, the scent releasing itself immediately into your skin. You recognize hints of the same smell that lingers in the high sanctuary. When you hand it back, he scatters it into a bronze bowl set over a low flame. Almost at once, the air shifts, the fragrance blooming into the room. You leave him to his work, stepping back into the corridor. The scent follows you, clinging faintly to your skin and hair. It feels as though the temple has marked you in some subtle way, folding you further into its sequence. In the outer courtyard, the sun has begun its slow tilt toward the horizon. The light is less harsh now, but the heat still hums in the stone under your feet. A group of acolytes sits in the shade of the colonnade, weaving narrow strips of palm into braids. Their fingers move quickly, almost without looking, as they talk in low voices. Every so often, one of them tests a braid by pulling it taut, then sets it aside in a neat coil. A young boy waves you over and offers you a strip of palm. It is stiff at first, but softens as you work it between your fingers. He shows you how to fold and cross the strands. The pattern's simple enough to remember after a few tries. The palm smells faintly green, and the fibers squeak softly when you pull them tight. "These will bind the jars," he explains, nodding toward a row of tall, narrow vessels lined up nearby. "The lids stay closed until the gods have had their share." You glance at the jars, each one stoppered with a fitted clay cap. Some are marked with painted symbols, others are plain, their surfaces burnished to a soft sheen. You can imagine them carried into the sanctuary, their contents hidden until the moment they are opened for offering. The boy finishes his braid and loops it neatly around his wrist before setting it aside. He looks satisfied in a quiet, unshowy way, the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing the work will hold when it is needed. The sun has lowered enough now that the courtyard's shadows stretch far across the stone. The air has cooled a degree or two, enough to lift the weight from your shoulders. In the far corner, the older priest is speaking with a group of younger men. They listen closely, nodding at intervals, but do not interrupt. When he catches your eye, he beckons you over. "You have seen the work," he says, his voice as steady as always. "You have seen how the hands follow the heart here. That is the way of celibacy in this place. The hands stay ready because the heart stays clear. You think of the sweeping women, the sand in the chamber, the braiding of palm fibers, the mixing of incense. Every act here seems to lean toward the same center, the gods first, then the rest of the world. The priest seems to read your thought. It is not about what you keep away, he says. It is about what you make room for." His gaze lingers on you for a moment longer, then he turns back to the younger men. You step away, the words settling into you like a slow-burning ember. The courtyard is quieter now. A few people sit together along the shaded side, speaking in low voices. From somewhere deep inside the temple comes the faint sound of water pouring into a basin. The day has begun to fold inward, preparing itself for evening, and in that folding you feel the pattern hold you, as surely as the braids will hold the jars, as surely as the sand holds the memory of bowed foreheads, at least until the wind takes it. The courtyard has shifted again. It is no longer the bright, humming space of the afternoon, but something softer, cooler, and edged with the first shadows of evening. The light has thinned to a warm gold that clings to the stone surfaces as if reluctant to leave, and the air smells faintly of cooking fires from beyond the temple walls. Somewhere in the distance a bird calls once, twice, then falls silent. You stand near one of the tall columns, feeling the faint warmth it still holds from the day's sun. The stone under your bare feet is cooler now, the heat retreating deeper into its body. The rhythm of the place has slowed again. Fewer voices drift through the air. Footsteps are softer. Even the occasional sound of a broom against stone is more languid, as if the day itself is loosening its grip. A small group gathers near the far side of the courtyard. At first it looks like they are simply talking, but as you draw closer, you see that they are arranging a low table. Its surface is covered with a folded linen cloth, and on top they place several small bowls of water, each one catching the fading light like a piece of sky. A tall jug of beer is set beside them, its clay surface cool and dark. The older priest stands nearby, watching. He nods once, and one of the younger men steps forward to pour the beer into a series of smaller vessels. The sound is low, almost a purr, as the liquid meets the cup's inner curve. No one drinks yet. Instead, the cups are set in a neat row, their surfaces trembling faintly in the evening air. The priest begins to speak. His voice is lower now than it was in the bright morning, but it still carries without strain. You catch the repetition of a few familiar words, the ones you have heard before in offerings, in blessings, though here they seem gentler, folded into a tone that feels more like conversation than declaration. One by one, those gathered dip their fingertips into the bowls of water and touch them lightly to their lips, then their temples, then their chests. It is not a washing in the physical sense. It is more like setting a mark, invisible but acknowledged. The beer is raised only after this is done, and each person drinks a small sip before passing the cup to the next. When the priest reaches you, he holds out the bowl without hesitation. The water is cool against your fingers, leaving a small trail down your skin as you lift your hand to your mouth. It tastes faintly of the clay vessel, a grounding taste that sits quietly on your tongue. The beer follows richer, deeper, with a soft bitterness that lingers after the swallow. No one speaks during the sharing. There is only the passing of the cups, the soft dip of fingers, the slow rhythm of lifting and lowering. When it is finished, the vessels are gathered again and carried away without ceremony. The priest gives a small nod, and the group begins to disperse, their movements as unhurried as the shadows stretching across the courtyard. You drift toward the inner hall where the air is cooler still. A line of oil lamps has been lit along the walls, their flames steady in the stillness. The scent of the incense prepared earlier hangs here floral and resinous, but not overwhelming. It threads through the air like a quiet reminder of the day's earlier acts, still working themselves out in the unseen spaces. You follow the lamps until you reach a small chamber where a single low table stands against the far wall. On it rests a shallow bronze bowl, its rim worn smooth from years of handling. Inside, a thin coil of smoke rises from a mound of smouldering resin, twisting in the air until it vanishes against the stone ceiling. An acolyte kneels before it, head bowed, hands resting lightly on his knees. You stand quietly at the doorway, watching. After a time, he lifts his head and gestures for you to come forward. When you kneel beside him, the heat from the resin warms your face, and the smoke curls around you in soft ribbons. He says something you do not fully understand, then reaches for a small pinch of powdered herb from a dish nearby. He scatters it over the embers, and the scent deepens, instantly sharper now, almost green, with an edge that wakes the senses. "This is for the threshold," he murmurs, perhaps guessing your curiosity. "The place between day and night. It belongs to both, so it must be marked." You stay until the coil of smoke thins and the heat softens. When you rise, the scent clings to your hair and your hands. It follows you back into the hall, mingling with the lamplight and the cooler air. The temple is even quieter now. The few people you see move with a kind of inwardness, their eyes lowered or fixed ahead. No one is idle, but neither is anyone in haste. The pattern has shifted once more, the energy drawn inward as the day leans toward night. In the outer courtyard, the last strip of sunlight is sliding away from the stone floor. The sky above has taken on a deepening blue, and a single bright star pricks the horizon. Somewhere outside the walls, A dog barks once, then again, then falls silent. Along the northern colonnade, you notice a row of clay jars, each one stoppered and sealed with palm-weave fiber braids like the ones you saw being woven earlier. An older woman sits beside them on a low stool, her hands resting on her knees. When she sees you, she gestures toward the jars. "For the morning," she says. Her voice is soft but sure, the kind of voice that has said these words many times before. You crouch beside her, running your fingers lightly over the nearest jar. The clay is cool, the surface faintly rough under your fingertips. The seal is tight, the braid pulled taut. The contents are hidden, but you suspect they are for the gods' first meal tomorrow. "They will sleep with us," the woman says, glancing toward the jars. She smiles faintly. "They rest so they may rise ready." You sit with her for a while, watching as the light drains from the courtyard and the lamps along the colonnades grow brighter by comparison. The air cools more quickly now, and you feel it settle gently on your skin. When the older priest passes by, he stops briefly to rest a hand on one of the jars. He closes his eyes for a heartbeat, then moves on without a word. It is not a blessing, exactly more like a recognition, a shared moment with something that will carry the gods' portion when dawn comes again. The woman eventually rises, lifting the smallest jar with surprising ease. She carries it toward the inner halls, her figure folding into the lamplight until she vanishes from view. The rest of the jars remain lined neatly against the wall like silent sentinels waiting for their part in the next day's sequence. As the courtyard empties, you find yourself drawn toward the temple's outer wall. Through a narrow opening, you can see the night settling over the city beyond. The sounds from outside are fewer now, the soft beat of sandals on dirt, the murmur of late conversation, the faint clang of a pot being set aside. Above it all, the stars are beginning to scatter themselves more boldly across the dark. You stand there for a long time, feeling the cool stone under your hands, the steady breath of the temple at your back. The day has folded itself completely into evening now. The work is not finished, it never is, but it has shifted, as everything here shifts, into the slower rhythm of the night. You turn away from the wall and walk back toward the lamplight, the smell of resin and herbs still clinging to the air. The gods have been fed, the vessels sealed for the next day, the thresholds marked with smoke. The body of the temple and of those who serve it rests for a moment in balance between what has been given and what will be given again. And you, standing in the heart of it, begin to feel that balance settle in you too, as quietly as the last light leaving the stone. The night has wrapped itself fully around the temple now. It is not the wild darkness of a storm or the deep, unbroken black of a desert far from the Nile. It is a softer darkness, stitched with threads of lamplight and the low, glowing coals of braziers placed in doorways. Every flame is small, but together they map the pathways through the stone corridors like a constellation that has learned to walk. The air is different after sunset. It carries a coolness that is almost shy at first, touching your skin as if testing the welcome. Then it settles, bringing with it the faint scent of wet earth from the riverbanks beyond the walls. Somewhere outside, you can hear the distant lapping of water, though the Nile itself is hidden from sight. It is the kind of sound that slips easily into the background, like a heartbeat you only notice when you stop to listen. Inside, the temple has quieted further. The day's visible labours are done. No one carries baskets now, or sweeps the courtyard, or kneels in the garden to tend herbs. The work of the night is of a different order, quieter, slower, and less visible to any outsider. It is the work of guarding thresholds, not the gates or the doors, though those too are watched, but the invisible thresholds that lie between moments, between breaths, between the realm of the living and whatever walks beside it after the sun goes down. You follow a narrow hallway lit by two widely spaced oil lamps. Their light slides along the stone like water across polished metal, picking out tiny marks in the surface, faint scratches, a few lines carved shallowly into the wall. You run your fingers over them as you walk. They feel deliberate, though you do not know if they are words, tallies, or something else entirely. The passage ends at a small open space, a kind of hidden courtyard whose ceiling is the night itself. Here, a single brazier burns low, the coals dimmed to a deep orange. Two figures sit cross-legged beside it, their bodies wrapped in linen cloaks against the creeping coolness. One of them holds a reed flute, the other a drum small enough to rest in his lap. They are not playing, not yet. They are listening. You stand at the edge, not wishing to disturb whatever this is. After a moment, the drummer lifts his hand and lets it fall lightly against the skin of the instrument. The sound is soft, almost swallowed by the open air, but it carries a certain shape like the first word in a conversation. The flute answers with a thin, high note, one that seems to ride on the cool air rather than push against it. The exchange continues. Drum, flute, pause. Drum, flute, pause. It is not music in the sense of a performance. It feels more like a way of measuring the space between them, of checking that something unseen still sits within its proper bounds. The pauses are as important as the notes, maybe more so. After a time, the drummer stops and looks toward you. He does not speak, but gestures for you to come closer. When you sit beside the brazier, the warmth from the coals creeps into your hands. The flute player lowers his instrument, studying you with a calm gaze that seems both distant and attentive. "This is how we keep the night from wandering," the drummer says softly. "It is how we keep the paths straight until the sun returns." You nod, though the meaning is only partly clear. You suspect it is not meant to be explained in full, at least not yet. The flute player begins again, this time in a slow, winding melody that seems to circle the brazier before drifting upward into the open air. The drum follows, its rhythm even softer now, like footsteps moving away down a long corridor. The two sounds weave together until you can no longer tell which began first. You close your eyes for a moment. With them closed, the music seems to change. It becomes the creak of ropes on a boat, the dip of an oar, the lap of water. You are no longer in the courtyard, but gliding along a dark stretch of river, the stars overhead swaying with the movement. Then the drum shifts again, and you are back on the warm stone, the coals still breathing their slow heat beside you. When the last note fades, the night feels subtly different, as if the air has been combed smooth. The flute player sets his instrument down, and the drummer leans back, closing his eyes briefly. No one says anything. After a few minutes, you rise quietly and leave them to their work. The corridors seem longer in the night, the shadows thicker in the corners where the lamps do not reach. But they are not hostile shadows. They feel like folded cloth hiding, but also protecting. Your own footsteps sound different too. Less the soft slap of bare skin on warm stone, more a muffled whisper against the cooled surface. You pass a small side chamber, where a lamp glows low on a carved shelf. Inside, an elderly woman sits with a basket of something in her lap. At first you think it is grain, but as you step closer you see they are small clay figures, each one no taller than your thumb. Some are shaped like birds, others like fish, still others like human forms with arms crossed over their chests. She works with a short reed tool, scraping or pressing at the surface of each figure in turn. When she notices you, she holds one up. Its face is little more than 2 dots and a shallow line, but the shape is unmistakably human. "For the water," she says. "They travel with the jars in the morning. You remember the sealed jars waiting against the colonnade. The figures will go with them, silent companions for the journey from the temple to the place where they will be opened. Perhaps they are meant for the gods, perhaps for the river itself. Perhaps the difference is only in where you stand." The woman sets the finished figure into a shallow wooden tray and picks up another lump of clay. Her hands move slowly but steadily, each press of the reed tool bringing the shape closer to life. You watch for a while, then step back, the image of the tiny guardians fixed in your mind. Further along, you pass through a wider space where a few figures are seated on low stools. They are working over lengths of cord, knotting and looping in patterns you do not recognize. Some cords are long enough to coil on the floor beside them, others are no more than a hand's breadth. The knots are deliberate, some tight, others left loose enough to slide along the length. A young man looks up as you pass. "These are for the doors," he says. They remember the shape of what passed through. You wonder if he means people, or something less tangible. Before you can ask, he turns back to his work, fingers moving quickly in the lamplight. You leave them to it, the soft click of cord against cord following you down the hall. The deeper you move into the temple at night, the more it feels like a living body, one that breathes more slowly when the sun is gone, but whose senses are sharper for it. Every sound is distinct now, the faint hiss of oil in a lamp, the creak of a stool's leg against stone, the shift of linen against skin. Even your own breathing sounds like part of the architecture, drawn in and released into the same air that has filled these rooms for centuries. Eventually you come to a small doorway half hidden behind a hanging of plain linen. It moves slightly in the draught, as if aware of your approach. When you slip past it, you find yourself in a space with no lamps at all. The only light comes from a narrow slit high in the wall where the stars press their pale glow into the room. In the center sits a low stone table. Upon it rests a single shallow bowl filled with water. The surface is perfectly still, catching the starlight in a shape that shifts when you breathe too close. You kneel beside it without quite knowing why. The room is silent but not empty. It holds the same kind of fullness you feel when standing alone in a place that has been waiting a long time for someone to notice it. You touch the water lightly with one fingertip. It ripples outward in perfect circles until the surface is still again. Somewhere in the temple, the flute begins once more, a faint thread of sound winding its way through the corridors until it finds you here. You listen until it fades, and the night folds itself more tightly around you. When you finally step back into the lamplight, you realize you have lost all sense of how long you were in that room. But the temple has not changed its pace. It moves as it always does, without haste, without delay, holding its shape as the night deepens. And you, woven into it now, carry the quiet of that starlit bowl with you, like a hidden drop of water in the palm of your hand. The lamplight feels warmer now after the long stillness of that star-lit room, though it is the same pale gold it has been all evening. Your eyes adjust slowly, tracing the familiar softness of shadows along the corridor walls. Somewhere nearby, a thread of laughter drifts across the quiet, not loud, not breaking the night's composure, but the kind of short, almost voiceless laugh people make when sharing a thought that belongs only to them. You follow it past a row of closed doorways, each curtained with linen dyed in muted earth tones. Some hang perfectly still, others sway faintly with the movement of air through unseen gaps. The laughter comes again, a little closer now, and you step into a small courtyard enclosed by high walls. It feels even more intimate than the temple's other spaces, as if it were grown inward like a hidden garden. There are 3 people here, seated on the ground around a low basket. In the basket are dried lotus pods, their hollow chambers pale and brittle under the lamplight. One of the men is breaking the pods apart carefully, his fingers coaxing loose the small seeds inside. The others are sorting them into shallow bowls, whole seeds in one, cracked or damaged ones in another. The woman looks up first, meeting your gaze with a slow smile. She gestures toward the empty space beside her, and you lower yourself onto the warm stone. The scent is faint but distinct dry plant matter with a whisper of something sweet, like the ghost of the flower that once opened under the sun. "These are for the offerings at the river," she says softly. "They travel better than the flowers. The seeds sleep until they are woken by the water." Her hands move without hurry, long accustomed to the feel of each brittle pod. She passes one to you. The shell yields easily under your fingers, splitting with a dry crackle to reveal the tiny seeds nestled inside. You tip them into the waiting bowl. The sound is small but satisfying, like beads rolling together in a pouch. For a time, you join their rhythm. Break, sort, tip. The seeds pile slowly in their shallow dish, the damaged ones set aside without fuss. You notice how no seed is discarded outright. Even the cracked ones are gathered in their own place. Perhaps they serve a different purpose. Perhaps simply being gathered is enough. When the basket is empty, the man ties each bowl's contents into small linen bundles, folding the cloth precisely before knotting it with a palm-wee fiber tie. The woman smooths each bundle flat with her palm and sets it in a neat stack beside her. By the end, the courtyard smells more richly of the dried pods, their faint sweetness stirred by the work. The three rise together, lifting the stacked bundles with the ease of habit. They leave through a narrow arch, disappearing into the dimness beyond. You linger a moment in the quiet they leave behind, the ghost scent of lotus still curling through the air. When you step back into the corridor, you turn toward the deeper heart of the temple. Here, the air grows cooler again, and the lamplight is spaced farther apart. The walls seem to drink the light, holding only enough to outline the carved lines of lotus and papyrus that march in steady bands toward the ceiling. You pass an open doorway where the glow inside is softer still. Peering in, you see a lone figure seated at a table with a single lamp. The table is covered with narrow strips of papyrus laid side by side, some blank, others marked with the dark strokes of a reed pen. The man is writing slowly, dipping the pen into a small pot of ink before each stroke. His hand moves in a careful arc, forming symbols that are both graceful and deliberate. You realize you are watching the temple's record-keeping, the quiet shaping of the day into a form that will outlast it. Without looking up, he says, "We do not write everything, only what must remain when the rest is gone." The pen moves again, laying down another line. The rest lives in the bodies that serve today, and in the gods who watched. He sets the pen aside for a moment and reaches for a small cup. The smell of the ink lingers faintly in the air, earthy, a little bitter, like wet soil. He drinks from the cup, then resumes writing. You stay at the doorway until he sets the pen down once more, this time to place a small weight on the edge of the papyrus to keep it from curling. When he finally glances up, his gaze is calm, neither inviting nor dismissing. You nod in thanks and move on. The next passageway opens into a chamber where the walls are lined with shelves of low, wide jars. Some are sealed with the palmo fiber braids you've seen before. Others are open, revealing their contents: dried herbs, grains, what looks like powdered resin. The air here is heavy with mixed scents, earthy and aromatic. A woman stands on a small stool to reach the upper shelves, moving jars carefully to check the contents. She pauses when she sees you. "Every night we check," she says simply. "The gods are never left to wake to emptiness." She lifts a jar down and places it on the table, loosening the braided seal. Inside are dried figs, their wrinkled skins catching the light. She replaces the seal and returns the jar to its place before moving on to the next. Her movements are steady, unhurried, not the searching of someone looking for a missing thing, but the confirming of what is meant to be. After leaving her to her work, you find yourself in a long colonnade that runs along one side of the temple's inner courtyard. Here the air is fresher, touched with the night's cooler breeze. You can see the stars above, framed between the tall columns. They seem closer now, their light clearer against the deepening black of the sky. A lone acolyte walks slowly along the colonnade, carrying a small clay lamp in one hand and a shallow bronze dish in the other. From time to time, he stops at one of the columns to trace a symbol on its surface with the tip of his finger, then breathes lightly over it as if sealing something invisible in place. When you approach, he glances at you without breaking his rhythm. "These are the marks for passing safely," he says, in a voice barely louder than the rustle of his linen robe. They tell the night we are expected here. You fall into step with him for a while, watching as he repeats the act at each column: touch, breathe, move on. It feels less like a ward against danger, and more like a quiet introduction, a reminder to whatever walks the darkness that the temple is not theirs to enter unannounced. At the far end of the colonnade, he turns into a narrow stairwell that leads upward. You follow, climbing toward a faint strip of light above. The stairs open onto the temple roof, where the air is cooler still. The city spreads out below in a dark patchwork of rooftops and alleyways, the Nile glimmering faintly in the distance. Several figures are gathered here, seated in a loose semicircle facing the river. Each holds a small lamp, the flames flickering in the open air. They sit in silence, watching the horizon where the river meets the sky. No one looks at you, but there is space to sit, and so you do. The night is quiet except for the faint hum of the wind. From time to time, one of the lamps gutters, then steadies again. You realize they are waiting not for anything specific, but for the river itself, for its quiet movement in the dark. It is a kind of keeping watch, an act of presence rather than expectation. When you finally descend, the corridors feel warmer again, the air closer. The temple is not asleep, but it has folded into itself, the outer layers drawn in like the petals of a flower at night. You move toward the space where you began the evening, the small courtyard with the brazier, and find it much the same, though the coals have burned lower. The flute and drum are silent now, resting beside their players, who sit with eyes closed, listening to whatever it is the night has to say. And you, carrying the quiet of the roof and the scent of lotus seeds still faint on your fingertips, understand that this part of the temple's life, the keeping of thresholds, the watching of water, the tending of marks in the dark, is as essential as the offerings given in full light of day. Perhaps more so, because it is here, in the hours when the world's edges blur and the gods walk more freely, that the temple's vow of being set apart must hold its shape most firmly. And you, breathing in the night's cool air, feel yourself holding that shape with them. The night has reached that strange, suspended hour when it feels neither late nor early, as if time itself has stepped aside to let the dark pass without counting. The oil in the lamps burns lower now, their flames softer, leaning a little to one side in the faint currents that wander the corridors. In the far reaches of the temple, some spaces have gone completely dark, not through neglect, but because those who serve know exactly which corners can be trusted to hold the night without light. You walk slowly, the soles of your feet tracing the faint seams between stone slabs. Some seams are so fine you barely feel them, others hold a shallow groove, polished by years of feet following the same quiet routes. The air carries a blend of scents, faint resin smoke from the braziers, the cool breath of stone, and under it all, the nearly invisible dampness of water stored deep within the temple's inner spaces. You pass an open doorway where a single low lamp glows. Inside, two young women are sitting opposite each other with a reed mat stretched across their laps. They are repairing it, feeding new reeds into its loosened edges. Each strand is pressed into place with a quiet patience that makes the task feel almost ceremonial. They do not speak much. When they do, it is in short phrases, mostly about the way the reeds are taking to the old weave. One of them glances up and gestures for you to join them. You settle on the floor beside the mat. The reeds are cool and slightly damp from soaking, their fibers softened for the work. Your fingers learn quickly to follow the mat's pattern over, under, press tight, slipping into the rhythm as if you have done it before. It is the kind of work that seems timeless, the same now as it would have been 100 years ago, or will be 100 years from now. When the last reed is worked into place, the women run their palms slowly along the edge to check the tension. It is smooth, strong, ready to carry weight again. They set the mat aside without flourish, as though the satisfaction is in the readiness itself, not the praise. You step back into the hallway and find it emptier than before. The sounds of the night have thinned further the brush of linen along stone. a jar lid set gently into place somewhere far off, the sigh of someone settling onto a mat to rest. Even the city beyond the temple walls has quieted, its earlier bursts of laughter and conversation reduced to an occasional murmur. Following a faint glow ahead, you come to another small courtyard, open to the sky. The moon has climbed high enough now to spill pale light over the walls, its reflection catching in a shallow basin of water set at the center. An older man stands beside it, dipping a bronze ladle into the basin and pouring the water slowly back, as though reminding it of its own sound. When he notices you, he pauses, the ladle still in his hand. "This water waits for the morning," he says. "It listens to the night, so it will know what to give when the sun calls." He lowers the ladle again, the trickle breaking the silence just enough to let it close over again. You wonder how many nights this water has stood here, drinking in the darkness before carrying its unseen message into the day. Perhaps it remembers the stars as well as the dawn. You leave him to his vigil and wander toward one of the narrower corridors where the lamps are fewer and the shadows heavier. The air cools again, and you catch the faintest scent of something sharp and green. It leads you into a long, low room where bundles of fresh herbs hang from wooden beams. Their leaves are still bright, though the edges have begun to curl in the dry air. A young acolyte moves quietly among them, checking each bundle, loosening the twine around those that are too tightly bound. When he reaches the end of the row, he turns toward you with a small smile. "They will be crushed for the morning smoke," he says, his voice as hushed as the room. "The gods like to wake to the smell of what grew in their own sunlight." He offers you a sprig from one of the bundles. The leaves are soft and faintly sticky, releasing a stronger scent when you rub them between your fingers. It clings to your skin as you return it, as though unwilling to leave. The work here is slow but constant. The acolyte moves on, adjusting another bundle, while you step back into the hall. The quiet seems thicker after the green smell, like cloth draped over the world. You drift toward the far end of the temple, to where the thickest shadows gather. Here, a narrow doorway stands ajar, revealing a space smaller than you expected. A single oil lamp burns on the floor, its flame cupped between two stones. Beside it sits a woman with a low wooden box in her lap. The box is open, and inside lie small discs of polished stone, each one carved with symbols you do not recognize. She runs her fingers over them as if counting, then looks up at you. "They are the night's memory," she says. "We place them where the gods have passed, so they do not forget the way back." She picks one up and sets it on the floor beside her. It catches the lamplight briefly, then settles into shadow. The rest remain in the box, waiting for their turn. You have the sense they are not moved often, only when the night has changed in some way worth marking. When you leave her, you notice the lamp's flame wavering slightly, as if acknowledging the movement of air your passing has made. The temple feels almost like a dream now, not in the sense of unreality, but in the way the familiar takes on a softness, a rounded edge, in the deep hours. Every surface seems closer to its own essence. Stone is more truly stone, air is more truly air. You walk through it with the quiet awareness that you are not simply in a building, but in a living rhythm that goes on whether you see it or not. As you pass through the central courtyard again, you see the brazier's coals have dimmed further, their glow a deep, slow pulse. The flute and drum are gone, their keepers have left the space empty, trusting the coals to hold the shape of what was played earlier. You pause beside them for a moment, feeling the heat drift lazily upward, carrying with it the faintest whisper of the day's offerings. Beyond the courtyard, a faint metallic sound draws you toward a side hall. There, a man is seated with a small bronze dish in his lap, tapping its rim gently with a slender stick. The tone is clear but soft, the kind of sound that seems to travel farther in the dark. He taps once, waits, taps again, waits. Each pause feels as deliberate as the note itself. "This tells the air we are still here," he says when he notices you. Some things you do not say with words. You sit for a while, listening to the soft bellotone marking the dark in even intervals. It is oddly grounding, as if each note draws a thread between the present moment and the next, tying them together so they cannot drift apart. When you rise, the temple feels even quieter than before, as though the sound has reminded everything to hold still. You make your way slowly back toward your own sleeping place, the reed mat waiting in its corner. The corridor is empty now, the lamps burning lower, their shadows stretched long across the stone. You pause before stepping inside, letting the quiet press against you like a second skin. The gods are not visible here, they rarely are, but their presence hangs in the air like the scent of smoke long after the fire has gone cold. The night is theirs now, and you are simply one of the many shapes moving gently within it. And as you lie down, the reed mat firm under your body, you realize you have learned the night's lesson without anyone having to say it. Celibacy here is not a retreat from the living world. It is a long, patient keeping of the path, even when the world sleeps, even when no one is watching. The gods first, even in the dark, especially in the dark. The temple seems to breathe with you as you lie there, the reed mat gently imprinting its pattern into your skin. It is not the restless breath of a place half asleep, but the deep, slow rhythm of something that has learned how to outwait centuries. Even in this stillness, there is movement, a faint shift of air down the corridor, the whisper of a curtain swaying somewhere you cannot see, the almost inaudible pop of a cooling stone releasing the day's stored heat. You are not the only one awake. Soft footfalls pass now and then beyond your doorway, each step unhurried, without the sharp heel tap of the daytime pace. A low murmur of voices, carried no farther than arm's length, drifts by once before fading again into the stone. It is impossible to tell whether these sounds belong to priests moving through their nightly duties, to acolytes fetching water for dawn, or to something older, unburdened by human titles. The ceiling above you is swallowed in shadow. Your eyes follow the darker outline of the doorway curtain instead, swaying faintly in the draught that seems to breathe through the temple at night. It is the same rhythm you felt earlier in the courtyard, the same invisible tide that pulls and releases between the walls. It moves you toward rising before you quite know why. You gather the light blanket from your shoulders and step barefoot into the corridor. The floor is cool now, the warmth of the day sunk deep into its bones. The oil lamps along the wall have burned lower still, their flames domed in small golden cups, throwing only enough light to mark the edges of the passage. You walk without hurry, not seeking anything in particular. The temple at this hour opens itself differently, less like a map of rooms and more like a series of thresholds. Every archway feels like a decision. Every doorway curtain holds a question in its folds. Your steps bring you, without plan, to the garden you visited in the daylight. Under the moon, it is a different place entirely. The herbs lie quiet in their beds, their leaves darker now, the scent of them sharper where the night air presses down. The date palms stand like sentinels, their fronds whispering to each other in a language you cannot catch. The pale sand of the paths holds the light of the moon in a muted glow, so that each step leaves a slightly darker print before fading again. At the garden's centre, a clay jar rests beside the low wall. Its mouth is sealed with palm-new fibre braid, and its shadow lies long across the sand. Someone has set a small bowl of water beside it, reflecting the moon like a second, smaller sky. You crouch beside it, touching the surface with one finger. The ripple widens, disturbing the reflection until it becomes only light and shadow again. A movement at the far side of the garden catches your eye. An older woman is there, kneeling among the mint, her hands brushing gently over the tops of the plants. She does not look up immediately, but when she does, her eyes hold the same calm you have seen in the others who serve here. "These will be cut before dawn," she says quietly. "They must sleep a little longer while the moon still watches them." You nod, not wishing to break the spell of the moment. She returns to her work, and you leave her to it, stepping back into the shadowed corridor. The air grows cooler as you walk toward the heart of the temple. The sound of water reaches you before the sight of it, a soft, slow pour, as if a small stream were hidden in the walls. It draws you into the courtyard with the central pool, where the moon lies mirrored in the still surface. A young man is there, lowering a bronze cup into the water. When he draws it up, the surface closes again without a sound. He notices you and offers the cup. The water is cool and tastes faintly of stone and shadow. You drink, and the quietness of it seems to sink into you as deeply as the water itself. Every night, he says, the pool remembers the sky. That way, when the sun comes, it can tell it where the stars have gone. You hand the cup back, unsure whether he speaks in poetry or simple fact. Perhaps here, the two are the same. From the pool, your steps take you toward the colonnade that runs along the eastern wall. The view beyond is hidden in darkness now, the desert night pressing against the stone like a held breath. The columns stand pale in the moonlight, their carved lotus capitals catching thin crowns of silver light. A lone figure stands halfway down the colonnade, leaning lightly on a carved staff. It is the old man you have seen before, the one who spoke of celibacy as keeping the doorway clear. He turns when you approach, his face open in the shadow. You are learning to walk without asking where the path ends, he says, not as a question, but as an observation. You fall into step beside him, the two of you moving slowly toward the far end of the colonnade. The air is cooler here, a faint breeze slipping between the columns and curling around your ankles. Beyond the wall, the faint rustle of palm fronds blends with the more distant hush of the Nile. He stops once, laying his palm flat against the smooth surface of a column. This stone was set here before I was born, before my father's father was born, he says. It has listened to more prayers than any man could speak in a lifetime. It remembers without choosing. That is why it does not bend to the world's noise. You stand beside him, your own hand on the stone. It is cool under your palm, and you can feel the faint texture where tools once shaped it. For a moment you imagine the sound of those tools, the ring of bronze on stone, the voices of the builders speaking to each other under the same sun that still rises here. The old man lowers his hand and begins walking again. When you reach the end of the colonnade, he stops and nods toward the dark beyond the wall. The gods walk there too, he says. Not only in here, but here they know we are listening. You part ways there, his staff tapping softly against the stone as he moves away. You wander back toward the inner halls, your body moving more slowly now, as if you are being drawn toward rest in the same way the temple itself folds inward before dawn. The brazier in the small courtyard has burned down to a faint glow, its embers breathing out the last warmth of the day. The flute and drum still rest nearby, untouched since earlier. The air here feels like the closing pages of a book, not the end of the story, but the place where it is meant to pause. You return to your sleeping place. The reed mat is, as you left it, the blanket folded loosely at its side. Before lying down, you sit for a while in the dimness, listening to the temple's night sounds, the occasional creak of wood, the low sigh of air shifting in the corridors, the faint splash of water poured somewhere in the distance. When you finally stretch out, the mat welcomes you with its familiar firmness. The air is cool against your skin, and the darkness around you feels less like absence than like a shelter. You close your eyes and feel the rhythm of the place continuing beneath your own heartbeat. It comes to you then, the truth that has been winding through every step, every offering, every pause since you arrived. Celibacy here is not a wall. It is not an emptying out. It is a way of clearing the ground so that what must enter can find a place to stand. It is the patient keeping of space, not for the self, but for what moves through the world more slowly, more quietly than desire. And as the temple breathes around you, ancient, unhurried, unending, you understand that keeping such a space is itself a form of presence, a presence that neither clings nor chases, that simply waits with its hands open. The gods first, always the gods first. And somewhere in that quiet order, you too have been set apart, just enough to feel the current moving through you as it moves through these walls. You drift into sleep with that current, the temple's breath folding over yours, carrying you into the deep hours before the first light will find the stone again.